They towed my brother's truck, the very one we used to drive him for cancer treatments, because of a petty HOA violation. No warning, no compassion, just a cold notice and an empty driveway.
My brother, already fighting for his life, now had one more battle to face.
But what the HOA didn't know was I had a plan. A plan that would turn their precious clubhouse into something they'd never expect. A place of healing for everyone they ever tried to ignore. My name is Marcus Taylor, and my life changed the day a tow truck rolled away with my brother's only means of getting to his chemotherapy appointments. My younger brother Daniel had been diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma a year ago. At just 28 years old, he had dreams bigger than life. He wanted to travel, open his own design firm, and run a marathon. But cancer clipped his wings. We live in a quiet, upscale neighborhood governed by the Maple Creek HOA. Clean lawns, strict noise codes, and a rulebook thicker than a law textbook. I moved here 5 years ago after landing a stable job in IT, and when Daniel got sick, I insisted he stay with me. It made sense. The hospital was just 15 minutes away, and I could care for him. Daniel's old F-150 wasn't much to look at. Rusted doors, faded paint, one headlight slightly drooping, but it was reliable. That truck had carried him through college, road trips, and now to his weekly treatments. We had even installed a medical cooler in the back seat for emergencies, and my neighbors knew its purpose. But the HOA didn't care. One Tuesday morning, as I was brewing coffee, Daniel came limping into the kitchen, panic on his face.
Marcus, my truck, it's gone.
I froze. What do you mean it's gone? He pointed toward the driveway, and sure enough, the space was empty. My stomach dropped. I rushed outside and found a neon orange violation notice pinned to our mailbox. Vehicle violates aesthetic code towed per HOA regulation 6.4b. No warning, no prior notice, no doorbell rung. I called the HOA hotline and was met with a smug woman named Karen, no joke. She read the violation like she was reading a weather report. The truck had visible rust and hadn't moved in 48 hours. We have a right to enforce community appearance standards. I told her my brother was battling cancer and used that truck to get to the hospital. Then maybe he should invest in a less unsightly vehicle, she replied without flinching. That's when something in me cracked. I had spent a year watching my brother fight for his life through hair loss, vomiting, exhaustion, and now this. The one shred of independence he had left was gone, and someone like her had the audacity to call his lifeline unsightly? That night I sat by Daniel's bed where he was too weak to sit upright, and I promised him something. They think they've hurt you, but they have no idea what you mean to me. I'm not letting this go. Over the next week, I made calls. Dozens of them. You see, what the HOA didn't know was I work in IT security for a major hospital network. I had friends, I had resources, and most of all, I had fire in my chest. First, I tracked down where they towed Daniel's truck. The tow yard manager was sympathetic and let me retrieve it for free once I explained the situation. I had it transported straight to a local body shop. Full restoration, no expenses spared. But I wasn't done. While Daniel recovered from his latest chemo round, I started asking questions about the Maple Creek HOA Clubhouse, their pride and joy. That building was once a gym, now converted into a community center, except it was barely used. Just a few monthly meetings, wine tasting nights, and a board game club that met on Tuesdays. It was a waste of space, and it just so happened the building was sitting on a technicality. It wasn't HOA owned. It was leased from a private owner who had inherited it after his father passed. I found him. His name was Russell Green, a quiet 74-year-old man living 2 states over. I asked him why he'd leased the clubhouse to the HOA. They paid on time, never caused me trouble, he said. Didn't really care what they did with it. So I made him an offer. A generous one, double what the HOA paid, in cash, up front. He laughed. You serious about this? Dead serious. A week later, I owned the building they held their wine nights in. Daniel didn't know yet. I wanted it to be a surprise. Instead of hosting another HOA bingo night, I began transforming the clubhouse. Quietly, during evenings, I hired contractors to come in and gut the space. We installed private rooms, medical-grade air purifiers, and new lighting. I even partnered with a local mobile oncology unit. The plan was simple. This wasn't just going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be a full-blown treatment center for cancer patients who couldn't afford care or who were dealing with heartless HOAs like mine. We named it the Taylor Haven, in honor of Daniel. The grand opening was set for 3 weeks later. Invitations went out to the neighborhood. The HOA board was furious when they found out I had taken over their space. Karen called me. "You can't do this." "I already did," I said calmly. "And you should come visit. Might learn what compassion looks like." She hung up. But she came. They all did. When they walked into the newly furnished center with Daniel standing proudly at the front entrance wearing his hospital band like a badge of honor, there was nothing but silence. Silence and one long, slow clap from one of our neighbors. And then another. And then more. Because for the first time, the people of Maple Creek saw what kindness looked like. And this was only the beginning. Here is part 2 of the story. HOA towed my brother's truck used for cancer treatments, so I turned their clubhouse into a treatment center. After the opening of the Taylor Haven, things started to shift in the neighborhood. It wasn't just the building that had changed. It was the people. Neighbors who had once waved politely from their manicured driveways now stopped to talk. People asked how Daniel was doing. Some even cried as they walked through the hallway of framed portraits and plaques that honored cancer survivors and those still fighting. I had made sure to include photos of Daniel through his treatment, smiling, fighting, living. The clubhouse had been their sanctuary of rules, appearances, and exclusivity. Now it was a sanctuary of healing. But not everyone was happy. The Maple Creek HOA board, especially Karen, the president, was furious. They had lost control over what they saw as their space. And nothing enrages petty people more than realizing they don't have the power they thought they did. Karen tried to rally the board to shut us down. She sent out newsletters claiming the center would bring down property values and attract sick people to the community as if we were a disease instead of people battling one. But the community didn't buy it. A week after the grand opening, I hosted an open Q&A night in the newly converted common room of the Taylor Haven. Over 40 neighbors showed up. Some of them I barely knew. An elderly woman named Mrs. Lynn stood up and said something I'll never forget. "My husband died of pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. We didn't have anything like this. What you're doing, it's not just brave, Marcus, it's necessary. Thank you." The crowd applauded, and I saw Karen shift uncomfortably in the back row. She stood up, trying to take control of the narrative. "This was never approved by the HOA. This is still legally community property and—" "No, it's not," I cut in. "It was never owned by the HOA. You leased it, and when the lease ended, I bought it." She fumbled her words. "You can't just run a clinic out of a residential neighborhood." A hand shot up. It was Dr. Emily Tran, a local pediatric oncologist I had convinced to volunteer twice a week. "Actually," she said, smiling tightly, "you can, if it's a licensed charitable organization and zoned for community benefit use, which this is." Karen stormed out. The next week, we received a letter. It was a cease and desist, signed by the HOA's legal representative. Daniel read it out loud, his voice still weak from treatment, but laced with disbelief. "They're saying we're disrupting neighborhood aesthetics and violating noise ordinances," he said, shaking his head. "Are they serious?" "Oh, they're serious," I said, "but they're not ready for what comes next." See, Karen and the board had underestimated me again. They thought I was just a tech guy, a concerned brother with a wounded heart and a sense of moral justice. What they didn't know was that I had begun documenting everything. Every newsletter, every text message neighbors forwarded me, even a few board meetings secretly recorded where HOA members discussed targeting residents they considered problematic. I uploaded the recordings and documents to a hidden site titled HOA Cancer of Control, and I sent the link to one person. My friend Ellie, a producer at the local news station. Ellie didn't even hesitate. The following Tuesday, the 6 o'clock evening news aired a feature segment titled Local HOA Accused of Targeting Cancer Patient's Family, Community Fights Back. It exploded online. Footage of Karen calling Daniel's truck an eyesore played on repeat. Interviews with neighbors, doctors, even Russell, the man who sold me the Clubhouse, filled the screen. By morning, our little treatment center had a GoFundMe with over $82,000 in donations. People from around the country left messages. As a cancer survivor, thank you. HOAs have too much power. You're doing the right thing. God bless Daniel. Karen tried to do damage control. She released a carefully worded statement blaming a misunderstanding, but it was too late. Even some HOA board members began resigning out of embarrassment. I wasn't trying to destroy the HOA. I was trying to wake them up. Daniel was getting stronger. The treatments were working. One day I found him standing in front of the old truck in the garage, running his hand over the polished hood. I feel like maybe we turned something awful into something good, he said. I nodded. We did. But we're not done. The HOA sent one final threat, an attempt to revoke the Taylor Havens zoning status. But this time they made a mistake. They didn't realize I had already partnered with a nonprofit cancer foundation, and they had deep legal pockets and serious political connections. By the time the HOA realized what was happening, the foundation had sent in lawyers, lobbyists, and a formal proposal to designate our center as a permanent community medical outreach site. The city approved it. Not only was the Taylor Haven untouchable now, it was endorsed. The last time I saw Karen, she was packing her Range Rover in silence. Her house had gone up for sale. The word pending slapped across the sign out front. She didn't say a word to me as she drove away, but I whispered under my breath, good riddance. And as for Daniel, he finished his final treatment 2 months later. We celebrated with a huge block party in front of the center. Neighbors brought food, doctors gave short speeches, and Daniel, frail but smiling, stood before a crowd of nearly 100. He said, "They took my truck, but we built something no tow truck could ever haul away." The crowd roared. That night, I looked up at the stars and smiled. We had turned cruelty into compassion, control into care, a truck into a triumph. And the HOA? They never saw it coming. HOA towed my brother's truck used for cancer treatments, so I turned their clubhouse into a treatment center. The Taylor Haven wasn't just a clinic anymore. It had become the emotional heart of Maple Creek. Every Thursday evening, we hosted what the locals started calling Hope Nights. Cancer survivors shared their journeys. Families lit candles for loved ones they'd lost. Doctors offered Q&A sessions about preventative care. People who once nodded politely from trimmed hedges were now hugging, crying, laughing together. Maple Creek had been a place of strict regulations, of ornamental fences and silent sidewalks, but something had broken free. The walls the HOA built weren't just physical. They were emotional, cultural, human, and now we'd torn them down. Daniel was the star of it all. He had started gaining weight again, his hair beginning to grow back. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and still needed help walking long distances. But he was alive, and more than that, he was happy. One night, during a Hope Night, he stood with a microphone in shaky hands and said, "I used to be embarrassed by how sick I looked. I felt like I didn't belong here. But Marcus, and all of you, made me feel like I wasn't just a patient. I was a person again. That night, the crowd gave him a standing ovation. Even the mayor's assistant, who had quietly started attending, had tears in his eyes. But the HOA wasn't done. After Karen's resignation, a man named Brett Langston took over as interim president. He was younger, slicker, more calculating. Where Karen was loud and petty, Brett was quiet and legalistic. He didn't challenge us publicly. Instead, he started inspecting our clinic for compliance violations. He claimed our signage was, quote, too large, that visitors parked illegally, that we exceeded the noise limit during public gatherings. He didn't want to shut us down emotionally. He wanted to bury us in paperwork. I had expected this, and I was ready. I hired a community law firm with a sharp paralegal named Rochelle, who made it her full-time job to ensure we were airtight compliant. She was a force by the time she finished each rebuttal to the HOA's, quote, violations. The only thing they could do was fume silently. But Brett made his boldest move yet. He proposed a community vote to ban all medical or nonprofit usage of community land, essentially trying to force us to cease operations by rewriting the HOA charter. It was sneaky. If passed, it would impact more than just the Taylor Haven. It would shut down charity bake sales, community blood drives, even the old neighborhood scout troop. And yet, Brett spun it as, quote, protecting Maple Creek's identity. He didn't know I had something he didn't. The people. When the HOA announced the vote, I sprang into action. I knocked on every door. I printed flyers. I hosted town halls at the center. Survivors spoke. Doctors answered questions. Parents brought their kids who had received life-saving diagnoses at our free screenings. But the most powerful moment came from Daniel. During the final town hall before the vote, he walked up without help and said, "The same people who towed my truck said this place would bring down the neighborhood. But this place brought me back to life. It gave me hope. If you vote to shut it down, you're not saving a neighborhood. You're burying a heartbeat." There was silence. Then thunderous applause. Voting day came. Ballots were dropped at the community center, not the clubhouse, which now bore the Taylor Haven logo and a garden of fresh sunflowers Daniel had planted himself. Brett stood outside the voting area in a suit and tie, trying to keep a composed smile. I walked past him in a worn hoodie, carrying a box of donuts for the volunteers. I nodded at him. He looked away. When the results came in, we posted them outside the center with red ribbon. 87% of the neighborhood voted no. The ban failed. Brett resigned that night, citing personal reasons. I later found out he was moving out of state, likely because the legal foundation supporting the Taylor Haven had filed a formal grievance against him for harassment. Things finally quieted down. We expanded services. Local nurses volunteered. A therapist donated time for family grief counseling. Daniel became a regular speaker and was even featured in a national cancer awareness documentary. One day, he and I were walking back from the clinic, and he paused by the old parking spot where his truck used to sit. "You know," he said, "if they hadn't towed my truck, none of this would have happened." I looked at him. "Funny how life works, huh?" He smiled. "No, it's not funny. It's powerful." The best part? The Taylor Haven started getting calls from other neighborhoods, people asking how we did it, how they could turn unused clubhouses into community health hubs. We shared everything: open source plans, zoning tips, fundraising ideas. The movement was spreading. And it all started with a cruel act of control: a truck towed without warning. We turned that pain into purpose. But we weren't finished yet, because now it was time to go bigger. A nearby town had an abandoned HOA clubhouse, 3 times the size of ours. And I had just gotten off the phone with a retired oncologist who wanted to help open a second location. Daniel turned to me and asked, "You think we're ready?" I nodded. "We were ready the day they towed your truck." 6 months after we defeated the HOA vote, the Taylor Haven was no longer just a community clinic. It had become a movement. Local news had picked up our story. Then, national media came knocking. Former HOA Clubhouse becomes lifeline for cancer patients. From tow truck to treatment, one man's battle turned neighborhood redemption. Grassroots healthcare, how a brother's revenge healed a community. I never set out to be a leader. I was just trying to help my brother. But now, we had opened our second center in the neighboring town of Fairgrove, this time without HOA resistance. In fact, their board partnered with us. Their clubhouse had sat unused for years. With some volunteer labor and donated medical supplies, we had it up and running in 6 weeks. Back in Maple Creek, things were changing beautifully, organically. The same neighbors who once tattled on each other for leaving trash bins out were now organizing meal deliveries for families in treatment. High schoolers were earning community service hours by reading books to chemo patients. One young woman, inspired by Daniel's story, began nursing school. The HOA had lost its grip, and in its place, a new kind of leadership emerged. Compassionate, community-based, and deeply connected. It felt like what a neighborhood should be. But not everyone was thrilled with our success. One morning, I received a certified letter from Karen Holt, the former HOA president, the same one who had towed Daniel's truck in the first place. She was suing me personally for defamation, emotional distress, and intentional sabotage of her professional reputation. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. The lawsuit wouldn't hold. We had documentation, video evidence, and overwhelming public support. But that wasn't the point. Karen wanted to scare me. Instead of backing down, I did something else. I invited her to speak at our next Hope Night. It was bold. Some people thought I was crazy. But I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for us. She didn't respond, but she showed up. The room went quiet when she entered. She looked smaller, thinner, more tired than I remembered. She sat in the back, arms crossed, surrounded by people whose lives she had once tried to control. And that night, something happened I never expected. Daniel walked on stage. He wasn't scheduled to speak, he just took the mic. He told the story again. But this time, there was something different in his voice. He didn't talk about the pain or the injustice. He talked about what came after, about healing, about how our neighborhood became a family, about how even the worst people sometimes open the best doors unintentionally. Then he looked straight at Karen and said, "I forgive you. I don't forget, but I forgive. Because holding on to hate would have killed me faster than cancer." The room went silent. Karen's eyes welled up, and she left, quietly, without a word. She never sued again. That night, I realized what real power looked like. Not in board meetings, not in fines or threats or signatures. Real power was in forgiveness, in turning pain into purpose, in healing not just bodies, but hearts. 1 year later, Daniel rang the victory bell in our clinic. Cancer-free. We held a block party that night. Music, food, laughter. The mayor came. So did doctors from 3 nearby hospitals. A documentary crew even filmed the whole thing. We had a cake shaped like a tow truck with the words, "Thanks for the push." Daniel gave a toast. This truck was the worst thing that happened to me and the best thing that happened to all of us. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As for me, I stepped down as director of the Taylor Haven, not because I was tired, but because it was time for new leadership, real leaders, survivors, community organizers, people who had lived the mission, not just sparked it. I stayed on the board. I helped with new site launches. I focused on writing a book about our journey, the truck that changed everything. And I kept showing up every Thursday night. Because Hope Night wasn't about me. It was about us. Now, every time I pass that old clubhouse, the one where HOA officials once held their power over us, I smile. It's no longer a symbol of control. It's a symbol of courage, of change, of community, and of a brother's love that refused to be towed away